Welcome to the ThinkData Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Dataworks. Today, I'm joined by Eli Ben-Joseph. He is the co-founder and CEO of Regard, and they are a Series B health-tech company, which uses artificial intelligence to turn EHR records into actionable clinical insights. Really good to have you on today, Eli. And I know it's obviously, it's kind of a double-edged sword here. One of the hottest spaces, artificial intelligence, coupled with one of the largest industry sectors, certainly in the United States. And obviously you lead in Regard for a good number of years now. So I'm really keen to kind of, I suppose, take it back to day one and obviously get a bit of a background to you. And then we can obviously understand a bit more about Regard if that works for you. So yeah, over to you.
Sounds great. Yeah, it's nice to be here, and thanks for having me on board.
Pleasure.
Just quick background on myself. I grew up in the Boston area, and I grew up loving computers and technology. So I spent a lot of my early years kind of like looking at the advertising pamphlets from Best Buy and Circuit City and looking at the different specs of the computers. And I was in awe of how fast, felt like every week there were changes to how fast the processors were going and how much more RAM was available. And naturally that led to me wanting to build my own computer when I was about 13 years old. So, dove in pretty deep, pretty young, started learning how to code around the same age, just really basic stuff. But I remember making web pages and, learning Visual Basic back in the day. And, that translated to me diving in a bit deeper in high school. And, my first, and this is relevant to the story, but my first job was, I needed some cash senior year of high school. And I applied to Dunkin' Donuts a couple times. I got rejected 3 times in a row and decided, I joked that I settled for a job in software engineering as my first job. So my friend said, hey, you know how to code and this company needs some help, so they'll pay you $10 an hour, which back then was huge. Yeah. Now I realize that they were still getting a steal of a deal. But so my first job was writing scripts for a local company. And, summer, I was very fortunate that I was accepted into MIT for undergrad. And I thought, obviously, I'm going to do computer science. I got into one of the best computer science schools in the world. And so I thought that was the path. But interestingly, this first job that I had, I was sitting in a cubicle 8 hours a day in the summer before college, while all my friends were outside doing things and staring at a screen. And I'm saying, man, is this what the future is like if I take this path? Am I just going to be in a cubicle all day until I retire? Like, that doesn't sound fun. So I actually turned away from the computer science world in college. I said, I don't know if I want to do that. So I ended up being pre-med and I studied bioengineering instead. So that kind of begins the health interest for me.
Interesting.
And my co-founder, who I didn't know at the time yet, we both shared a very similar path of being bioengineering students in undergrad, pre-med students, taking the MCAT medical entrance exam, shadowing doctors, and then during that experience of shadowing, realizing that something wasn't right and deciding not to go into the health path. And for me, it ended up meaning grad school at Stanford, where I studied a mix of management and computer science, and then starting the company out of my dorm room of grad school. So that's a little bit of background on myself.
I love that. It's kind of a classic kind of startup, founder journey, which I love, kind of going back to kind of refocusing your path from, as you say, starting up as a software engineer. Was there always the natural entrepreneur in you back then, do you think? Kind of when you were sitting there, you thought, was there that curious mind thinking, is this it?
I think so. I think it did go dormant for a while in college and a couple of years after college. But I do remember, when I was in 6th grade, if you remember the tech deck skateboards.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So my friends and I just kind of made snowboard versions of those where you could put your little fingers into bindings and do snowboard tricks.
Love
and
that.
we thought it was really, people in my class thought it was really cool. So we kind of made a bunch and would sell them for like $2. So that was like my first business. And then even in high school, my friends and I realized that we could build PCs, and we were very good at putting like cool fans and lights and controllers and making them look really neat. And a lot of people didn't know how to do that. So we kind of started a small business selling those services, building custom PCs for people. It didn't last very long, but that entrepreneurial spirit has been in there for a while, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you said you didn't necessarily know your subsequent co-founder Regards too well to begin with. Do you complement each other in terms of the technical and the operation and commercial side, or how does that symbiotic relationship work? Because that's typically where a lot of co-founder relationships fall apart, when they either overlap each other or they're not kind of complementing each other.
Yeah, actually in the early days, there were 3 of us that started the company.
Okay.
Third co-founder, Thomas, same story, actually. Pre-med, took the MCAT, didn't go to medical school. So that's what got all 3 of us together and being like, something is going on here, that there must be some problem that's pushing us away. So in terms of division of work, Thomas was the most technical. So it was very obvious he would be CTO. And actually in the early days, Nate and I kind of both, we did have a lot of overlapping skills, but we have our differences as well. And Nate and I actually went on a long walk in the early days and kind of talked it out about who would be CEO and who would do a different role. And, I made the pitch basically saying that I'm a bit more technical than Nate was. So I said, hey, we want to build a very technical product. And for that to work, I think we need the CEO to be someone who can dive deep on the technical side, but also still have the business acumen. Yeah. So I said, I think that's me more than him and anyone else out of the 3 of us. And, he agreed. And now, 7.5 or so years later, I think it was the right decision. And our partnership is better than it's ever been, actually. Nate is a bit more gregarious than me, but more outgoing. He's kind of owning our commercial side of things. So he's the one that, leads sales, marketing, customer success, goes to conferences, charms our people that we're trying to sell to. He's very naturally very good at that and better at that than I am. I kind of sit in the middle where I kind of balance between what our business goals are and then also on the technical side, what we need to do and the product vision. So I think it's actually worked out really nicely in terms of division of responsibility. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? You find that kind of the right lane, and you obviously benefit from being in those lanes, but equally you're obviously complementing each other as well, which only ultimately benefits the business anyway, because there's the right support structure there. I'm really keen to touch on Regard in terms of what the product is, and whilst we won't necessarily go back to kind of day one, the evolution of that product. And obviously we have most of our listeners are here in the US, but we also have listeners in the UK, in Europe, and further afield. So in terms of EHR, that's obviously people listening, it's obviously the US version of medical records. But in terms of Regard, what problem is it solving, and kind of what makes that unique?
Yeah. So, when we started this at, I'd say, the last AI boom back in 2016, 2017, when it was all about deep learning. It wasn't large language models, all about deep learning. And at that point, it was very obvious to us that AI was going to have an impact on every industry, and data was going to have an impact on every industry. And when we bonded, the 3 of us founders initially bonded over like why we didn't go to medical school, we ended up doing dozens and dozens of phone calls. And what we found is that so many physicians today are feeling burnt out and are feeling unhappy because they don't have the time to actually be doctors anymore, really. It's so much of their work is administrative. So much of their work is digging through data. And, actually a study that was done last year showed that on average, the physician only reviews about 3% of data that they have access to.
Wow.
Which is a bit terrifying.
That is terrifying. Especially medical data.
Yeah, clinical data. Yeah. And they're good at finding the important stuff, obviously, and making sure you're not going to get hurt too badly. But there's no doubt that in that 97% of data that's unreviewed, there may be things in there that could impact care. So what Regard is, in a nutshell, is we are a layer, an AI layer that integrates with the medical record. We mine 100% of that data, and then we pass it into algorithms that we've created that will augment and supplement the work of a physician, really amplifying their abilities. So physicians, when they open up, we integrate into their charts. They don't have to go to a different web page, but it's right there. When they click on Regard, we will mine that data and we will present to them that information as if they had a med student or an intern that was taking the first draft. A lot of our doctors jokingly say Regard is like a AI intern that never gets tired. And
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And it can tease it up for them to review and make sure that nothing critical is being missed.
Interesting. That's really, when you break it down like that, it just makes sense. And I say when you look at, you talk about the evolution of AI, how important is that kind of development of AI from, let's say, as we look at large language models, we're looking at generative AI, we look at how quickly AI is adopting and being adopted. How important has that been to Regard's growth as well?
Absolutely important. I think what's funny is when we started the business, at least in the healthcare, like in ad tech and in pure tech, like everyone already was adopting AI.
Yep.
In health tech, though, we were seen as, like kind of weirdos. Like, we did thankfully find some innovative clients to start building our foundation, and we're talking to investors in the early days, and like most people wouldn't even want to touch healthcare with a 10-foot pole. And now it's one of the hottest markets and industries. So it's an incredible transformation in that way. On the technological side, it's also having a huge impact. I mean, we are actively revamping our product to incorporate the latest and greatest in large language model technologies in places where it's clinically safe. We're not using them to make clinical decisions, but rather to augment the work again. So understanding the tone of voice that doctors like to write their notes in, or being able to parse large pieces of data and pull out key information, especially from unstructured data sources. So we're incorporating language models into our system that way to make our system even better.
You touched on that really interesting there in terms of how healthcare is typically quite a more of a reluctant adopter of technologies, and obviously it's quite entrenched in its old way of working and quite document heavy and manual heavy. And obviously what Regard's doing is trying to free those positions and associated folk to provide better care ultimately. But how much of a focus, when you look at kind of your initial go-to-market strategy and how you were selling, how you getting the messaging out, when you're factoring in the reluctance or the nervousness of these health systems and clinicians to adopt AI. Can you think back to kind of the early days to kind of how you were prospecting, how you were selling versus maybe how you're doing it now?
Yeah, there's some differences, but also still a lot of similarities. So in the early days, it's all about finding those innovators, people who there were even back then clinical leaders, executives that saw this as the future that was coming. And we were, thankfully managed to get connected to a handful of these really innovative leaders who brought us in the early days. And having that support in a health system from leadership, from clinical influencers is really important. And that's still the same today. So now, while we don't need to be convincing, health execs that AI is the future, I think that's now the easier part. The concept of why they should pick your product, and when you're training our users, why they should try it and why they should trust it, those are still the same. And a lot of that has to do with social proof. So, you can see 10 ads for a hammer and you're in the market for a hammer and you're like, oh, I don't know which one to get. Then your buddy who likes to do a lot of construction projects talks to you one day, he's like, I use this one and I love it. Like, you're going to go buy that hammer because your buddy that you trust is using it. And it's the same thing with healthcare. And in fact, I think it's even more important, where when trying to get users to adopt the product, we tend to start with the innovative, influential doctors who will use our product and say, wow, this is awesome. And then we'll leverage that. We'll say, hey, can you help? Can you do a town hall with the rest of the people in your group and tell them how you use it? Tell them why you trust it. We leverage their own colleagues as much as we can because they're going to be able to convince the others much more than, us coming from the outside and telling them about it. So that's one thing we do. And the other thing is our entire system is based on trust and auditability. Yeah. There's a saying that is the adoption of AI in healthcare moves at the speed of trust. And I definitely believe that's true. And in our system, when we help with diagnosis, one of our big things is we diagnose. When we share a diagnosis that's new, it is completely auditable. It is completely data backed. They can open the box and they can see what did Regard do to diagnose this condition. And that helps build trust as well.
Interesting. So showing that kind of inner workings of, how you've reached that conclusion. So it's actually giving them insights, but also the thinking behind the insights.
Exactly.
It's very smart. Yeah. And what I'm interested on that then, when you're talking about artificial intelligence and you talk really freely about you've got those innovators who are like, they're supporting and evangelizing the AI message. And then obviously with those town halls and with that messaging, trying to bring people on that journey. But for those folk that may be more reluctant or may more nervous, how do you not much convince them, but how do you change your messaging? How do you change your, the way you're engaging with them to kind of bring them around to your way of thinking?
A lot of people who are resistant to something, it's because there's a fear or there's some they're scared of it or something that needs to be addressed that's underneath the surface of what they're saying. And we're saying, I don't want to use it. And it's typically because of some kind of fear of being replaced or whatever it may be. And, some people you just have to say it's not your time to learn this and you move on and you don't want to spend time. But for others, you say, why? You ask them why. Why didn't you? What are you worried about? Something like, what do you not trust it? Oh, I don't trust it. Okay, well, let's walk through it together. Let us show you why we back everything with data, so you can open the box and trust it. Or they may say, I don't trust AI. I don't like AI. Well, why? What's the fear behind that? And I think I don't see any time in the near future that doctors will be replaced by AI. No. I think. They're already underwater. We're just trying to bring them back to the surface. Yeah. So I think we kind of try to remind them of that. This is far from replacing you. This is just going to try to making your life better. So we try to hit them with a combination of, asking them why, and then saying, why don't you talk to your friend over here who's using it and ask them why they're using it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Actually, someone yesterday said something to me about, obviously, what happened with COVID was obviously shocking for everyone involved, especially if you look at the health systems and the pressures they were placed under. But actually off the back of that, automation, workflow, efficiency tools is actually they've seen that bounce back even more because the people who are obviously in frontline care and actually they're struggling to attract staff. Did you see that kind of, I know you launched similar time, but did you see that come back? There was more messaging actually afterwards thinking we need this because we're already, as you said, already sinking.
Messaging on, for example,
so post-COVID, did you begin to see, when you're presenting this, was there more feedback coming back that with all the pressures they were already under and equally the exacerbation of obviously COVID, did you begin to see that people were more open to tooling and workflow automation because of the issues they were finding beforehand?
Yeah, to some degree, yes. I think it was interesting during COVID. It was actually pretty neutral for us. It didn't. I think telemedicine really got a boost. Yeah, obviously. For us, we've actually found a kind of very steady place and steady growth, and I think part of that is because not only do we make the doctor's workflow more efficient, but we have an economic impact for the health systems as well. We're by finding more conditions. It helps with their finances as well. So we've always kind of had a pretty steady sales motion in that sense because of that.
Yeah, interesting. Look, I'm keen to dig on the talent piece. So I think obviously Series B, you've grown, and as you said, you were three initial founders. You're the ones obviously building the messaging, but a lot of startups, they raise capital, and yes, a lot will go into the product itself, but obviously a lot of that capital is to be deployed to hire. Can you talk about kind of how you approach that? Because it is a competitive space. There is a lot of healthcare technology companies launching. AI obviously is the big thing at the moment to get into. But how did you approach that? And if you think back to that journey, what were some of those challenges you had to overcome? Maybe it's regards to just hiring talent, but also retaining talent.
Yeah, recruiting is the lifeblood of a company. Yeah. A company is nothing but a bunch of people working on something. So, in the early days, it was, again, we were in a different space. It wasn't as popular. So it was a double-edged sword in the sense that it was a bit harder to find top talent that wanted to go to this industry. But at the same time, it wasn't as competitive. I think our mission as a company is to bring world-class healthcare to everyone. And we believe technology is a way to do that. And the benefit we've always had is we are creating something impactful. If you go to our website, there's a counter on there that is a live counter of diagnoses that our system is finding that doctors have reviewed and accepted. So that's every one of those diagnoses is a patient that has now had better care. And a handful of those, every single one of our doctors has a story of how our product has probably saved someone's life. So, I think that's something that a lot of people get excited about. Like, you can go work and sell more ads, or you can come work for us and save people's lives. And I think that really gets a lot of people excited. And that, we've actually, so far, knocking on wood, have had a pretty low attrition rate. And that's because I think we have a good culture here. So culture is the other side of it. I was very careful I was taught that, the first 10 hires you make are the ones that set the seed of the culture for the company.
100%, especially outside of founders. I think they're the most critical hires you can make.
Exactly. And we really were careful with who we hired for those first 10, set the right culture. And the other thing I've heard is, as much as you can as a founder, try to interview up to the first 100 hires you make. And for most roles, I have still interviewed almost every single person that has worked at this company to maintain that culture. And I think it's paid dividends. We do have quite a low attrition rate. A lot of people stay here for many years. And we just had an employee that hit his 6th year, which is pretty cool. And I think that all kind of compounds when people come in and interview to say, wow, you guys have been here for a while, you're doing something impactful, you're changing people's lives. That's what we use to get people to join us.
Pretty compelling. I think you touched on something really interesting about those first 10 hires, and then that culture permeates through the rest of those hires, and that becomes your management layer, and then you keep feeding the funnel with great people. And are you in office? Are you remote? How does that setup typically work?
We're hybrid. I'm in our office right now. We're based in New York City. Yeah. We have a nice office space here. We are transitioning to an in-person hybrid orientation. So, most people are coming in 2 to 3 days a week, with a lot of flexibility for remote work and heads downtime. But, I think we all have seen the value of that. Those serendipitous conversations that happen that you just don't get over a Zoom call.
No, there's much to be said about the water cooler chat, the lift chat, the kind of just quick whiteboard in the corner. I'm a massive, my day job is building startups, and I can say it's confidently most of the top startups that retain the best people and attract the best people are in office, or at least have that hybrid approach, especially centered around the big cities, the Austins, the San Franciscos, New Yorks of the world. So I'm really... What's next? I look at kind of Regard, and obviously you're in a really hot space, pretty compelling narrative in terms of why people should join you. But in terms of AI specifically, if you had your kind of crystal ball, how big a part is AI going to play over the next kind of 12, 18, 20 months and beyond within healthcare specifically?
Yeah, I think it's going to keep growing in what it can do. I think there's a lot of companies right now that are automating specific points in this data stack is what I call it. From you've got as soon as you as a patient say, I want to go see a doctor, you'll typically get a form you fill out, right? With what's your information? Why are you coming? And then you go into the hospital, they maybe get some more labs on you, you have a conversation. And then if you're admitted to the hospital, more labs, more conversations, treatments, and then discharge. And, I think what will happen is right now there's, and then from discharge, there's coding and billing and insurance that you have to deal with. So there's this stack of data that kind of flows through the system. And right now there's a series of companies that have automated kind of points in that stack. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a consolidation where you're going to have a few companies that can really automate that entire flow. So it's not multiple companies doing it, but rather one entity. So that's one way things are going to change. I think that we'll see, if we look out 2 to 5 years, I think we're going to find a way, more and more ways for you to get care outside the walls of a hospital or an urgent care, and potentially even without a clinician overviewing. The vision we have of the future is that in 10 to 20 years from now, the first line of defense in healthcare won't be, crap, I feel sick, I need to go to the urgent care or I need to do a telehealth, but rather, you open up Regard on your phone. Yeah. It has access. You've given it permission to have access to all your medical data. Maybe you've got an Apple Watch that's also sending it data, and it knows it's an agent that's been created on your behalf. It's an agent for your health. They'll say, okay, how are you feeling today? What's wrong? I have a cough. I don't feel great. I'm achy. Let's go get you some labs. You get your labs. You come back and it says, okay, you have a pneumonia. I've diagnosed you, and I've now given you a prescription for meds that are customized to your data profile. And without having to, and again, I don't think this will cover everything, but maybe that 10, 20, 30% of healthcare that's extremely routine, we shouldn't be wasting human doctor time to do things that are very routine. Yeah. So that's kind of the vision that we have is you'll start by talking to an agent, and it will then say, here's your diagnosis, or you need to get to the emergency room. Go see by someone. Yep.
It's fascinating, isn't it? If you look at it, I think AI has been, there's a lot of reluctance and nervousness about job displacement and, how this is impacting certain sectors and industries. But I'm a massive advocate of, with every change, this is a moment in time, isn't it? Actually, off the back of this is going to be the next generation of roles. And within healthcare specifically, you touched on an interesting point there is, if you're a physician or you're listening to this and you're, going through med school, you're thinking, AI, is potentially going to be doing this. What's the message would you have to them? Is around this here to complement, aid, and support you as opposed to replace you?
Yeah, absolutely. Complement, aid. I mean, look at ad tech. Look at Google, Facebook. Like, they all are huge users of AI. They all are some of the largest companies in the world. Again, it goes back to what I said in the beginning. Only 3% of data is reviewed today. And for every hour a doctor spends with a patient, 2 hours are on the computer. That's if this wasn't healthcare, this was a different industry, it'd be flipped. Yeah. You would already have an AI system that was recommending things for you, automating your clinical or clerical tasks, automating the administrative stuff, allowing you to see more patients or to be more present as a doctor. This is just going to level up the human, not replace the human. Yeah.
It's fascinating. That stat's obviously going to be the headline quote from here, I think, 3% of data. And actually on your point, which translates into the messaging to your prospects, but also people joining you, is obviously saving lives, and actually using that real-time data and AI is actually generally saving lives and creating a better world for everyone. I think it's a fascinating journey. And obviously, I'm all right in thinking, obviously taking a good look at your website. There's some case studies. People can have a look at that and understand, and obviously look at that ticker as well. And actually in real time, those live, the kind of diagnoses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Eli, it's been really good to have you on. I appreciate your time this morning. It's been a lot of fun. And thanks again. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.